Hey guys, we have a fantastic show for you today. I'm talking with Dr. Everett Worthington. Dr. Worthington is the world's leading expert, researcher, and practicer of forgiveness. You are going to love this show. Just hearing Dr. Everett talk about forgiveness is going to make you feel wonderful, and it feels good to feel good. So I really think you're going to love this show. Dr. Worthington is, well, he is forgiveness. And it is his hope that forgiveness is contagious. Now, before we go to our show, a word from our sponsors. Do you want to feel good in your own body? To feel amazing as you're designed to feel? Well, my friends, you are in luck. Head on down to osionline.com and look up the Daily 21's movement plan. For just $21, that's $1 a day for 21 days. However, after you do the Daily 21s and you do the 21 days, you're going to want to do it the 21 days forever. 21 and then 21 and 20. Anyway, for just $21, you can learn to move and feel amazing in your own body. Reestablish your reflexive strength, get rid of aches and pains, and just up your energy, your clarity, and your feel-goodness. All right, now, back to the show. Pull up a chair and buckle up. It's the Original Strength Podcast. So, Dr. Worthington, you are, I guess you're almost, I would call you Mr. Forgiveness.
It may be a little optimistic, but it's kept me off the streets and out of trouble for over 30 years doing research on it and clinical work.
Yeah, just trying to research you, I would think that you're probably the world's expert in forgiveness.
There are just some really good folks out there. Robert Enright at University of Wisconsin is a very well-known psychologist who studies forgiveness. Mike McCullough at University of San Diego, he was a former student of mine, but he's become really excellent psychologist that studies forgiveness. So, Frank Fincham at Florida State studies forgiveness in a number of areas. There are a lot of very good researchers and clinicians out there working on forgiveness. So I'm privileged to be one of those.
So you're saying you're in good company.
I am.
So is it possible, what is your definition of forgiveness?
I think that there are two different kinds of forgiveness. And one of those we call decisional forgiveness. So this is when people make a decision to treat the other person as, without thinking that they have to get even with the person or pay the person back, but also to treat the person as a valuable and valued person. So this is a decision to forgive. It's what psychologists call a behavioral intention statement. It's not really behavior, because if the person died tonight, I might never get to carry out my intentions, but I still have made this decision. So a person can make a decision to forgive and still feel resentful and bitter every time that they thought about the event that hurt them. And so that suggests there must be a second type of forgiveness. And I call that emotional forgiveness. So emotional forgiveness is replacing negative, unforgiving emotions with positive, other-oriented emotions like empathy for the person, or sympathy or compassion, or even love for the person, especially in a romantic relationship where there's been hurt.
So I was wondering about that because, forgive and forget, or forgive and just move on and let the past be the past. But that's not always the easiest thing in the world to do at all.
Not at all. In fact, it can be of course, a real struggle. And so people can make a decision to forgive, and that's a legitimate type of forgiveness. They can carry that out for the rest of their life, treat the person differently, interact with them well. but it still may rankle on them and they may not be able to control their emotions. On the other hand, sometimes people might have an emotional experience that replaces that negative emotions. Maybe something terrible happens to this person they've held a grudge against, and all of those negative feelings go away, but they never really have made a decision to forgive. So either of those two could happen apart from the other. They do happen together in probably 15% of the cases or so.
So I have a background. Well, I was raised Southern Baptist,
Uh-huh.
so um, and obviously forgiveness is a big part of Christianity. So, and I guess one of the problems with forgiveness is like, say you forgive somebody, but you still feel all these negative emotions and stuff. Then you wonder if it's true forgiveness. And then you start, maybe you could even start condemning yourself because, well, I want to forgive him. I try to forgive him. I can't forgive him, or I thought I forgive him, but I really didn't because I still feel this way. How do you overcome things like that? Like, I mean, I know you said replace the negative with a positive, but is there more to it, or is it just that?
Well, I think when I look at the Christian scriptures, what I think is that Jesus requires us to make a decision to forgive, a decision about how we're going to treat the other person. But there's not really any indication that that our emotions must absolutely change so that I feel warm and fuzzy in this person's experience. So I think what Christianity really looks at is promoting decisions to forgive. I think God requires decisional forgiveness. God desires of us emotional forgiveness, but really that's often just not possible. I think of Peter's question to Jesus: how many times do I have to forgive? 7? And Jesus says, well, not 7, but 77, or 70 times 7, depending on the translation. So, well, every time if it's 490 times or 1,000,000 times you have to forgive. Well, if somebody hurts me 490 times, I think it is physically impossible to control my emotions and get them back to zero. But I can make a decision every time to treat this person differently because I want to treat this person differently. I value them as a valued and valuable person. So I think as I say, God desires us to have that emotional peace, but sometimes people can just make it impossible for us to achieve that.
Mm. How important, or can you even talk about self-forgiveness?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I wrote a book on self-forgiveness because I experienced some self-condemnation after my brother committed suicide. Uh, my mom had been murdered back in 1996, and my brother discovered her body. And he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, I believe, and depression, because he just couldn't get those images and that trauma. He could not deal with it. And I tried to get him to go to counseling, but he kind of blew me off and said, I don't want to hear any more about it. And I responded like a hormone crazed 16-year-old who's been challenged by his little brother, and by going, yeah, well, whatever. And then soon after that, he committed suicide. And I really felt a lot of self-condemnation because I could not, um, I didn't do what I knew I could do as a clinical psychologist of dealing with people's resistance. So I didn't behave very well. So I, held, condemnation of myself. Of course, one of the things we sometimes struggle with if we're Christian is that people go, well, God has forgiven us. And, what can you add to that? And, I mean, I think I go back to the passage in Samuel, Second Samuel, in which David was confronted by the prophet Nathan because of David's collusion and murder of Uriah and also his adultery with Bathsheba. And Nathan, of course, tells David a parable, and David gets really incensed that this person who, took the precious lamb of a neighbor when the person had many lambs of their own. So David gets really upset and says, this person deserves to die. But being a merciful king, I think he just needs to pay the person back by 4 sheep. And then Nathan, of course, says, David, you are the man. And David realizes instantly that that this is a parable, about his behavior. And he immediately says, I have sinned against God and humans. And Nathan, a prophet of God, says to him, your sins are forgiven. So God has taken care morally of David's sin. And yet David still has self-condemnation. And we can see this because we look at Psalm 51, which is creating me a clean heart, O God, restore right spirit within me, cast me not away from thy presence. A very familiar psalm. And this psalm starts out by saying, this is a psalm of David after being confronted by Nathan. So we see that David still feels a lot of psychological self-condemnation, even though this prophet of God has spoken to him the words of God, your sins have been forgiven. So we see that, it is possible to forgive ourselves, and what we're accomplishing there is a psychological and a moral change that is not really covered by the forgiveness of God. So I think there's, and I'm just rambling. Feel free to jump in here at any point. But I think that if we're going to approach self-forgiveness, we have 3 kind of preliminary steps. And the first of those is take the matter to God. So, I bring that matter to God and I, seek God's forgiveness on the basis of Jesus's perfect work. But second, then I have to consider that I probably hurt other people by my acts. And so I need to, seek a kind of a social type of repentance and a social type of, presentation. I need to try to make amends, to apologize to the people that I've hurt, to accept responsibility for what I've done. And then, the third area is, I have probably inflicted some kind of moral injury on myself. When I do things that I don't think I should be doing, this can hurt me morally and hurt me, deliver what's called a moral injury. And so I have to seek a kind of a psychological repair. So once I've, gone to God and then, sought to make amends for people that I've injured and also dealt with my own psychological injuries, at that point, I can start really to consider forgiving myself.
That was awesome. That was amazing. So for somebody that forgives, and if my neighbor has offended me and I forgive him, who is that forgiveness for? Is that forgiveness for my neighbor or is it for me?
It's for both people. I obviously, if I forgive my, someone who's hurt me, I do experience a lot of benefits. And, I experience psychological benefits of improved mental health, reduction of depression and anxiety, more sense of flourishing, more sense of well-being. So I have a lot of well-established mental health benefits. I also have relational benefits because this, makes it possible for that relationship perhaps to be renewed and restored. I also experience spiritual benefits because, I believe that if we forgive, that pleases God, and that's a blessing. That it's not something where we earn God's, forgiveness of us, but we please God, and that relationship works both ways. And then there are also physical health benefits, and these benefits, some of those are very immediate, like just being calmer and having my physiology calm down, my parasympathetic nervous system work better. That's the calming nervous system. My sympathetic nervous system be less reactive. My cortisol levels go down. Lots of different systems in the body are affected. So all of those benefits accrue to myself, but also, I can release a person, whether I ever communicate my experience of forgiveness or not. I do believe that there is a verse that talks about how we have the power to bind things in heaven or loose things in heaven on the basis of what we do. And I believe that we can loose people in heaven, at least we make an appeal to God to do that, on the basis of, our forgiveness of that person. So I think it benefits both myself and the other person. And if we want to treat the relationship as something that's separate from either individual, and it benefits the relationship too.
Don't take this the wrong way, but I feel like I'm talking to Jesus himself. This is like you ooze just gentleness and forgiveness. This is amazing. So I want to read your mission statement. By the way, are you retired? I don't think you're retired, but I think you're retired, but I'm not so sure that you're retired.
Well, on my email, it says, although my salary has retired, I have not.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I am continuing to do a lot of research, and I do it because I love it. It's it's just something I do just because it's needs to be done, and I enjoy it.
And so your mission, I found this online. Your mission statement is to do all I can to promote forgiveness in every willing heart, home and homeland.
Right.
Why? That is beautiful, but why is that important to you?
Well, I think it became important uh, after my mother was murdered back in 1996. That murder, I was able to forgive the young man who did it. Um, he was never brought to justice as a result of this, but at one point he confessed and then later retracted the confession. So, the police think that they know that he did it, but it never was proven, never was even indicted as a result of lack of evidence. So I was still kind of thrown up in the air a little bit. I'd studied forgiveness for quite a while before that as a person who just, as a Christian, practiced forgiveness, but also as a therapist and a couple therapist in a part-time private practice. Almost every couple that I ever saw ended up, if they moved through and stuck with therapy, they ended up dealing with forgiveness issues because of all the hurts. And so so then we started doing research on forgiveness, did it about 7 years, wrote a book on it, and then this murder happened. And that kind of shook my foundation a little bit in terms of uh, professionally. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. My effort up to that time had been really aimed at building faith, work, and love in couple relationships. And I thought, well, that's still really important, but you know, there may be other things that are important, more important than that, maybe. Well, it turned out within 6 months of that, I got the opportunity to go to South Africa as a visiting scholar on behalf of the South African government. And some of the things that I got to do there was I got to talk with 8 research universities. I got to give 3 regional conferences on forgiveness to Christian counselors there. But I also got to talk with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Johannesburg. And at the end of uh, that trip, which was a 23-day trip, as I remember coming back on the plane and thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And at that point, I was like 48. And uh, so I just thought, I think God really is calling me to reorient and not just to work with forgiveness in couples or families, and not just to work with people who are individually struggling, but also to do what I can to promote forgiveness in different countries, in different communities, in different settings. And so a lot of the things that I've done since then have been, individual approaches plus couple approaches plus community interventions in communities like churches or workplaces or libraries or just kind of community organizations, things that are known in public health as mediating organizations. That is, we look at how do you change, say, the city of New York. Well, you probably are not going to be able to go in and do a public health campaign in New York. But if you got a coordinated effort at a number of workplaces and churches and universities and things that are existing communities, that those could go together to change really a substantial portion of New York. And so this is, you can just magnify that one step up to in every homeland, and look at how do you change a country? Well, let's change cities. How do we change cities? Let's change communities within the cities. And how do we change those communities by changing couples and individuals. That made sense at the time.
I like it, and I can see how that kind of change could affect the whole world. Um, how how many books on forgiveness have you written?
Well, I don't know. I would say, I know that I've written 45 books, but they're scattered throughout counseling in a secular setting, counseling in a kind of lay counseling or pastoral counseling, uh, um, books on various virtues like humility, a number of books on humility. I think probably maybe 10 or 12 books on forgiveness. I really, I'd have to count. I don't know.
If you had to give it a different word or come up with some synonyms for forgiveness, what would they be?
Well, probably wouldn't. It's just because in academics, since we have, since the stakes are so low, the fights are so vicious, and there's always discussions about, well, what is forgiveness? And this researcher will define it this way and stake out a territory, and this one will stake out another territory. So I think I would not really try to think of synonyms for forgiveness. I would say that forgiveness is related to some things. It's related to mercy, but mercy is something that is societal, whereas forgiveness is something that's inside a person. It's a change in their intentions about how they're going to behave, or it's a change in their emotions. But mercy is really a decision by a person who has the power to do so, to administer less punishment than is justly deserved. So you can see that, so that fits right square in the justice system, where justice is social and societal, and mercy is social and societal. And of course, I may have merciful motives inside me, but that's not the same thing as mercy, because I could have all the merciful motives or merciful feelings, but if I don't act in mercy, it's not really mercy. It's just feelings that are located in me. So mercy is related to forgiveness. Grace is related to forgiveness, but certainly, the kind of the common definition that, mercy is not getting what we do deserve, and grace is getting what we don't deserve. Or nobody deserves to get forgiveness, so because they've harmed someone. But I can give forgiveness as a gift of grace. So, so forgiveness related to grace. So, I could probably come up with other things that it's related to, but those are two good ones.
Those are two good ones. So your email says you're retired, but you're really not retired. It sounds like you probably still feel like you're just getting started. Would you say that forgiveness is pretty much like your secret weapon or secret sauce to staying young and vibrant?
Well, probably give my wife a lot of credit for that, and I've always done sports, and so I think those contribute, and but certainly having an interest that becomes really one of our purposes in living. That pretty much will help people stay young, regardless of what that interest is for them. And that's forgiveness has been that interest for me. I have others too. I just have poor impulse control when it comes to research. If I see it, I want to study it. I want to, write papers on it or books. So lousy impulse control.
I think the rest of the world is benefiting from your poor impulse control on your studies. A couple more questions, and I'll let you go. If somebody is struggling with forgiveness, where's the best place they can start?
Well, a lot of that depends on what their values and the way that they live their life. But one thing I like to tell people is that forgiveness kind of begins with what we call an injustice gap. That is a sense of how much injustice has been done to me. So that a large injustice gap is really hard to deal with. But a small little injustice gap, somebody bumps me in the street, I forget it before I get to the end of the street. So it's not hard to deal with at all. So once, we start thinking about this psychological injustice gap, I think the next thing to realize is forgiveness is only one of many very good ways of dealing with that injustice gap. So ways that are honoring to God. So I could, for example, seek justice. I could turn it over to God. I could turn it over to God for God's divine forgiveness, or I could turn it over to God just by relinquishing it. Not my problem. This is your problem, God. I could forbear, which is not the same thing as forgiveness. Paul makes a distinction saying forgiving them and forbearing. I could tolerate it, which is, it's kind of suboptimal way. It's not, it's great, but it's not the best way. I could minimize the issue and say, well, it's not really that important, and kind of lower the injustice gap psychologically. I could accept it. Life is too short. I'm just going to accept this and move on with life. But I could also forgive it. So when somebody is struggling to forgive, one of the things that I would say is, forgiveness does not have to handle all the heavy lifting here. There are many God honoring ways that you can reduce that injustice gap, make it less of a struggle to forgive. So if I can just relinquish some of this to God and give up some of my struggle over this, if I can, see a person experience some of the natural consequences of what they did to me, and those, I remember a guy ran me off the road on my bicycle once, and I was really energized by that experience, and so when I fought the bike back up on the road, I made this gesture. Now, this probably wasn't my best quick Christian witness to make this gesture, but I just got out of frustration, turned loose the handlebars and, expressed frustration. Well, this guy stops in the road and backs up traffic behind him. And, I ride my bike up beside him and he's trying to get my attention, but I'm like, no, not going to go there, not going to look at him. Well, at any rate, he ends up leaning across the cab of his truck and flicking me off, making a gesture pointing the way to heaven as I look at it, but at any rate, having made that point, he accelerated up the hill. Well, I'm thinking deep existential thoughts about the fragility of life and, how I'm making one little unthought out gesture, could have been a really tragic thing. When I crest the top of the hill, he's parked over at the side. And I'm thinking, oh man, get a life. And then I notice that he's getting a ticket from one of Henrico County's finest officers. Funny, all of my unforgiveness just went away because of seeing him experience the natural consequences of what happened. So anyway, that's one of the many ways that I think we can deal with unforgiveness and injustice. But suppose that a person says, well, I still want to forgive, and I think I ought to forgive. That we have a workbook that I've created called Reach Forgiveness, where Reach stands for 5 steps to go to reach emotional forgiveness. And we also invite people to make a decision to forgive after they've worked through exercises to help them experience each of these steps. So let me just name the steps real quickly. R is recall the hurt, but I want to recall it not in a way that rehearses the same hurts again and again, but rather recall it in a way that tries to get into the framework of the person who did this. So E is empathize. So recall the hurt, empathize with the person who hurt you. A, give an altruistic gift of forgiveness, a gift that the person doesn't deserve. It is an altruistic gift that I give. And then C is commit to the forgiveness that I experience. And the reason that I commit to that is so that I will hold on to that forgiveness when I doubt. So this workbook, well, we have groups that people can use that are secular or Christian. On my website, which is evworthington-forgiveness.com. All of these leader manuals and participant manuals are absolutely free. Anybody can download them and use them as they want. I've got a recording on there of me leading a forgiveness group at a Christian college, and so that people can see how I do this and to talk them through it. And then because I want to make it more accessible than just people organizing groups to do this, I've also created the same program in a do-it-yourself workbook. So this do-it-yourself workbook is, there's a 6-hour version of this workbook, both a secular 6-hour version and a Christian-oriented 6-hour version. And then there is a 2.5-hour version that has just had this massive worldwide study to show that this works in really high conflict cultures like Hong Kong, Indonesia, the Ukraine, two sites in the Ukraine, Colombia, 60 years of civil war, South Africa. And this is like almost 4,600 people that went through this workbook in a scientifically randomized controlled experiment. So those workbooks now are available free, absolutely free, in English, Ukrainian, Chinese, Spanish, and Indonesian, absolutely free to 2/3 of the world's population in their first language. And if people are interested in that, they can find it in the usual https:// the whole rigmarole at the beginning. But then Reach dot discoverforgiveness.org. So not .com, but .org. And those are downloadable and usable in whatever language people need. We're working with a team right now that is actually translating these into Arabic. So I'm going to do a study in quite a number of Arabic speaking cultures in the Middle East. So, we're hoping, I'm doing all I can to promote forgiveness in every willing heart, home and homeland. And it seems like it's spreading into a number of homelands.
That is how you change the world right there. That is definitely a hope that will not disappoint. So that's amazing. I'm going to put those links in the notes of the show. If you're listening, just go ahead and go to those websites and get the Reach workbook. I know it's going to be life-changing. Dr. Worthington, can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
Do you like peanut butter?
Like being what?
Do you like peanut butter?
I do. Why? Is there a dead giveaway here? Like in my office?
So no, I try to ask that to almost everyone I interview. And I see you like crunchy because that was a crunchy jar of peanut butter right there.
Exactly right. Is there another kind? I didn't know there was another kind.
That is awesome. Oh, this has probably been the most important conversation I've had on the show. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me, and I always love it. So, if you want to do it again sometime, let me know.
I think I would love that. Thank you so much. Everyone, if you're listening, this is Dr. Everett Worthington, and he is Mr. Forgiveness. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Now get outside and play.